All right, so this one is a live feed of Good Afternoon Ghana. We're coming to you live from the Kwabena studio. You're welcome to the program, and we thank the Almighty yet for another afternoon to still continue with the discussion. You know, every Monday it gets very, very tiring where we move back to back. Considering the issues at hand. And today has to do with the debt exchange program. And I think those who are actually now contending with government a bit is the local bond holders, or the local bond holders, domestic bond holders, maybe we better term them economically. So the domestic bond holders are having back-to-back meetings. We're hearing some groups holding meetings in hotels. Some also went to the government chair. They paid a courtesy call on the government chair earlier this afternoon around 1 p.m. So there's a lot going on within the system. Are they really agreeing, or is government reaching an agreement with them? You're welcome to the program once again. Let's go straight into the issue that is at hand as far as this bond is concerned, or the debt exchange program is concerned. The Ministry of Finance actually did release a statement, and want to capture part of the statement or read excerpts of it for you to know what exactly the ministry said. And this is coming from the Ministry of Finance. The heading is Announcement Domestic Debt Exchange Program, DDP extension for immediate release, and it was released today. Just in case you're wondering, it was released today. So, Accra, Ghana, 16 January 2023, the government has taken the decision to extend the expiration date of the domestic debt exchange program from Monday, 16 January 2023 at 4 p.m. today to Tuesday, 31 or 31st January 2023 and 4 p.m. At 4 p.m. GMT. The new expiration date. 2, the government has structured the domestic debt exchange program as voluntary or as a voluntary exercise in order to shield domestic bondholders. We will, however, use this period to further engage with stakeholders, especially individual bondholders, to mitigate any adverse impact while we all contribute to the overcoming our economic challenges. 3, important discussions are ongoing with financial institutions, notably in relation to forbearance measures, accounting treatment, as well as structure and parameters of the Ghana Financial Stability Fund, that's the GFSF. Following the first announcement of the domestic debt exchange program on September 5, 2022, the government entered into advanced discussions with multiple stakeholders. These discussions resulted in the amendment of the terms of the offer, which was announced on the 24th of December 2022 to expire on 16th of January 2023. A successful domestic debt exchange program is critical to advance on our economic recovery process, and therefore it is in our common interest to make it work. And it's issued by the Public Relations Unit, Ministry of Finance, and copied to all media houses today for us to also be updated in exactly what's going on with the debt exchange program. All right. So today we are actually expecting to speak with Setekwe, former finance minister, also an economist, also Daniel Osabute, who is an economist and lecturer at Accra Technical University, and he is with me already in the studio. You're welcome, sir. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
Right. Thanks for, and Happy New Year. Happy New Year. I haven't seen you this year,
yes.
Right? Well, it's in a good place to wish you. All right, so Manasseh Ataboahe is also government spokesperson on economy, and he will join us also as we analyze the issue at hand now. Okay, So let's just kickstart. I'll come to you now. When I get the other guests, we'll speak with them, or when they join us, then we'll also continue the discussion. Let's start with you. Let me start off with the letter I read. I think with the third point. Okay. It says that, okay, so the minority also held a press conference. We'll give you details of that, but for now, let's go to this one. It says, following the first announcement of the domestic debt exchange program on December 5th, 2022, the government entered into advanced discussions with multiple stakeholders. These discussions resulted to the amendment of the terms of offer, which was announced 24th of December 2022 to expire on 16th January 2023. Does that mean that that amendment expires today?
Exactly so.
Okay, explain that.
Now, Anne, good afternoon to viewers of Metro TV. Looking at the way we've been extending the restructuring date, it shows clearly that things are not working well for government. I think this is about the third time we are having such extension. If government had engaged stakeholders before announcing this measure, I'm sure we wouldn't have been where we are today. But because the major stakeholders were left out of these discussions, you announce before you engage me. So definitely there's going to be resistance, and that is what we are seeing.
And in your opinion, the major stakeholders are the ones who are holding bonds now.
Exactly. So they are the major stakeholders. Now, if you could recall, on the 5th of December, when it was announced that there will be this debt restructuring, all along, government was not forthcoming whether they were going to do the restructuring. But finally, when it was announced, the individual bondholders were not part of those who were going to be affected. Okay? So along the line, what happened, because the institutional bondholders, engagement didn't work out well, and we saw TUC coming in strongly to resist, because you cannot use pensioners' funds, in doing that. So government gave in. Now it is on the individual bondholders. So I don't think right from the word go, government even engaged the individual bondholders. So there's a time that they are doing it. And once again, you realize that government also announced that they were going to extend it to the foreign debt as well. And as to whether those people were also informed before the announcement was made is also another question. But I don't think that they were even informed. They got to know that this is what government is then doing. You just announce that you are going to suspend payment of a legitimate debt when those concerned have not been contacted or have not been engaged. I don't know. That is why we are having all these resistances from all those interested in this restructuring.
So, today's the program was supposed to have started today.
Yes.
And it would have affected those whose bonds were maturing this year.
This year, yes.
This year.
Yes.
And are supposed to be receiving their interest.
Interest.
So with these extensions, is that technically affecting the due date for interest receipts as well?
I hope that with the extension, probably after further engagement with these individual bondholders and other bondholders, government is likely to amend the terms. Because if you look at the first one that was announced, they were not going to pay interest for 2023. Okay? Now, 2024 going, it will be 5%, and then after 2025, you have 10%, what have you. But with this extension, I hope that government will also soften their position. If for nothing at all, they will be expecting, the individual bondholders will be expecting that they cannot forgo whatever interest due them. So, Anne, I hope that with the extension, there will be variation in the terms, something that will be appealing to individual bondholders. But as it stands, I don't think that it is something that can be implemented now. okay, because the program hasn't taken off yet. Okay, so it is now that government is trying to appeal, even though we've been told it is voluntary. If it gets to the point and you reject it and government has no money, what do you do?
Seth Tekpe, former finance minister, has joined us. Seth, thank you for your time. You're welcome to Good Afternoon, Ghana, if you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Great, you're welcome. How does it look like? How does this look like? Daniel has actually described that it doesn't look good with the back and forth extensions of the dates of the program being rolled out. You haven't manned the economy of Ghana before. What can you tell us?
Well, thank you very much. I think I must have missed some of his representations, but I do agree with what I heard, that it's not looking good. And he did mention the foreigners. Remember that we are talking about the domestic, restructuring. And what we know is that the foreign debt, which is also to undergo a similar exercise, the creditors have taken an initiative and formed a committee to engage government. So far, we don't know what progress is being made on that front. And therefore, if we are having problems with domestic, as we did have, with the pensions and labor, then it means that two things are very important. It means that the conditions under the staff level agreement, by the IMF is delayed and not met. Remember when the staff level agreement came on board, on stream, government's position was that we had, reached a staff level agreement. The next step would have been going to the board. Some of us pointed out that we should be cautious because there were two conditions in the statement that was issued by the IMF and government. And it stated clearly that, a debt restructuring would have to be agreed with creditors and then approved by the management of the IMF, and it will have to satisfy and be a condition for going to the board, which means that the IMF board itself, which will approve the agreement, as well as that's the.
I'm sorry, let me just interfere. Is it intentional that your camera is off? Is it deliberate?
No, it's not. It's not deliberate.
Okay. Then I'm just alerting you that it's off.
Okay, I must be having some issues.
Okay.
Because okay, maybe during the break I'll try and sort it out.
Right. So keep talking.
Yes, and so the IMF, I was talking about the IMF program itself. The debt restructuring we are talking about, is itself also a condition for the board, the IMF board approving. Now that goes to the third key issue. It means that for as long as these are delayed, the bailouts that is expected, from the IMF is also being delayed. And we know the economy is not in a pretty good shape. And so what it means is, the fear which has been expressed or is being discussed this morning, that things might unravel in a way in which we do not, expect or will be pleasing, to Ghanaians. I do agree, with my colleague, on the panel that it's important for government, to start a serious engagement, program across board, because we cannot be making announcements affecting specific groups of, creditors only, and then backtracking, when we run into difficulty. A roundtable similar to what has been done in the past of bringing stakeholders on board. I think Ghanaians know that the economy is in dire straits already, so that is not the issue to be discussed. The issue to be discussed is the way forward, and the longer, it keeps, with high inflation, with reserves, gone down, and BOG being, the main backstopper, for the deficits. But BOG cannot continue in that regard. I do also agree, that coming to the table would have to require some realism by all those who are holding government bonds at this point in time, because as we speak now, there is a suspension, announced by the government, which means that, no interest will be forthcoming, no debt repayment will be forthcoming. Of course, what we have been doing is rolling, over the interest or refinancing it. And so I think all parties must come, to the realism that things are not so good. And at the table, I would suggest maybe some, senior people, experienced people who have gone through this, be brought to the table to assist, in forging a compromise and a way forward.
There has been, that the finance minister himself had stated that, and it's factual, really. You can check that Jamaica went through the same module and it worked for them. And currently, we have some African countries that also went through it or are going through it. Have you checked all those modules? And is it similar to what is happening in Ghana? Did they face such challenges before, it was implemented? Are there different models that we have not chosen the best?
Well, first of all, remember that we rejected the debt suspension, which would have included proposed by the G20 during the COVID, and which was being implemented by the very IMF and the World Bank on behalf of the G20. You would also recall, that the World Bank president was very, explicit, if I may not just say vocal, in suggesting that Ghana, should come under the debt suspension. And even after it ended at the end of 2021, he said that Ghana's problems would have been not completely solved, but problems would have been lesser if we had opted for the debt suspension program. Today, we are back talking to the same people, and you would have also seen a news item where the IMF managing director has said that they will try and bring the same creditors we are talking about now among the same creditors we are talking about now to the table to see if they can assist to the extent of even debt forgiveness, despite the fact that we have become middle income. Now, what we know about the countries that have done it is that it is not a speedy exercise. Information available, not published, but available from those who have been at the table, suggests that it could take between 20 minimum and 40 days, over a month, to actually resolve, the debt situation. And that is even when you have the fund, the G20 members and others, on board. So why we thought we could do this in a very short period, before the end of December, is one of the things that is a bit, baffling. So we have gone maybe since the last announcement, we would say, since the announcement itself, maybe a month. And so we would say that we are within the period, but countries have taken longer to reach. And our own domestic experience, we've done restructuring in the past. It's just that it's not been highlighted because there were none of these difficulties. Let me cite two of them.
Exactly.
You remember the single spine. We borrowed heavily to start paying the arrears. Then in 2015, we went to the World Bank and asked for a World Bank guaranteed facility, which we used to refinance all those domestic bonds. And then also the first sovereign bond that was issued in 2007 and which was due, to fall due in 2017. Remember, we created a sinking fund, used part of the sinking fund, actually a substantial amount of 515 million to pay down ahead of schedule. And the remaining, we refinanced, actually 336 at the time we were leaving office. And then another 200 we paid to refinance from the World Bank Guarantee Facility. And indeed, the remaining 200 million was used by the current government to pay off on October 4th, 2017. So that went fairly well, and it started. Remember, we did that bond at 10.2%. It was heavily criticized. But having gone through this successfully, by the time we did the 2016 bonds, we were in the 9% region. and trending, downwards. The second example is ESNA. In fact, before the announcement came out in May that we had restructured VRA's debt, with 11 banks, we had been talking for almost 3 to 4 months, to the banks, through joint committees between the Ministry of Finance, Bank of Ghana, and government on the one hand, especially since it involved energy, the power ministry, which was in charge of VRA at the time. And then on the other hand, you had the 11 banks and some foreign banks that had an exposure to VRA. And that was also restructured with a haircut. The haircut involved a reduction in interest rate, but then there was a liquid cash. So I'm saying our own experience, shows that these things are not, as quickly done, and we shouldn't have probably heightened expectations that they will be done, within a short period of time.
How deep are we in the situation that should we not, manage the situation properly, we may crash?
First of all, as I said, as we speak, compensation and interest, and we have discussed this maybe probably 3 years or so, that compensation and interest was taking all the revenue that was coming in. Interest is part of the debt, but that meant that we were borrowing, to amortize, to pay the principal, and so now this is going to be difficult to do. Even interest, is part of the deal now.
Right.
And it's going to be difficult. Perhaps if we can trim expenditure and come back to that situation where we are able to pay interest, then the discussion will be a bit more positive. Our inability to trim expenditure in the restructuring, the whole IMF program restructuring in a substantial way, particularly the flagship projects and the rest, is part of the problem. The second situation which will be a worry to us is what I mentioned. Bank of Ghana is financing about 40 billion of the deficit. From last year, recall that they had to come in among the bailouts for COVID of 10.7 billion Ghana cedis, which translated to 1.7 billion US dollars, higher than even the IMF gave to us at the time. We all know the situation in schools. We know the situation with arrears, wages, and the rest, which keeps coming up. And so, yes, we are in a dire situation. Should we not reach this agreement so that we can go to the fund and have an agreement and then have a fund program which will be supported, not just by the IMF, remember, but by institutions like the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and development partners, who often, because they're also on the board, and then principal shareholders on the board would have a wait-and-see attitude, such as we experienced in 2015 when budget support was virtually withdrawn, before in between century, and then agreements are set to go and reaching a fund agreement.
I will come back to the trimming of expenditure because there were some, measures that was announced or were announced by His Excellency the President. But let's go to Parliament. Honorable said, please hold on. We go to Parliament and take just an excerpt of what press conference was held or what was said by the minority leader in the minority group in Parliament. Let's have that video.
Pension funds will suffer a significant drop in value, especially Tier 2 and 3 pension payouts will drop further from their already low levels. We are assured that pension funds will not be affected. Thanks again to this minority, then led by our ranking member on finance, when we insisted an isolated pension for special attention and exclusion in the debt exchange program. Now, effects on individual bondholders. The inclusion of individual bondholders in the domestic exchange program, contrary to initial assurances from both the President and his finance minister, will all but wipe out Ghana's middle income status and impose high suffering on them, their families, and their dependents. So how come that initially they themselves were convinced that individual bonds will not be affected? What explains the sudden U-turn? We demand transparency and they are simply not transparent, even in the way they are managing this particular matter. Yesterday, about 1.3 million affected individual bondholders petitioned Parliament for a reversal of the government's debt exchange program. Another justification of our position that the initiative be suspended. This must be the largest and voluminous petition in a single matter ever presented to Parliament in our country's history. It is inconceivable to accept that individual bonds will be affected by a domestic debt exchange program. From the onset, there has been clear inconsistencies in pronouncement and the actual implementation. The haircut is now real. Nana Adodankwa and Bawumia, give us a break. We kind of react when you say there will be no haircut. You cannot borrow us into a ditch, a bottomless pit, and then wake up and without any transparency, they are now seeking to enter people's pockets. That's what they are seeking to do when they emphasize and include the individual bonds. So it is a recommendation of this minority that the domestic debt exchange program, in our considered view, will create extreme hardships for millions of Ghanaians and existing financial institutions and insurance companies. And therefore, if Nana Adodankwa and Dr. Bawumia had heeded to counsel from the opposition, and even from some of the Kwame Pienim and Co., we will recognize people who speak with wit and wisdom. They would not have plunged this country into this irredeemable economic crisis. It is obvious that Nana Adodankwa is transferring the responsibility to address the debt burden he has created through his irresponsible borrowing and populist fiscal policies to innocent Ghanaians and to the financial sector, and cleverly into the future that he does not belong, post-2024. This means that we in the minority, we are demanding major expenditure cuts as a manifestation of fiscal prudence for purpose of achieving fiscal consolidation. They are asking individuals forcefully to forfeit interest and principal payment due them. That is unlawful. In strict contractual terms, a breach of contract. We are at a loss as to why individual pension contributors have not been offered the same exemptions that Tier 1 and 2 contributors have been given. Maybe when the dialogue, they will resolve the anomaly. The inclusion of individual bondholders in the domestic debt exchange is the biggest transfer of funds from the pockets of Ghanaians to the government. As I indicated, they are now stretching their hands into individual pockets. And you know, when they say debt exchange, it's another version of Yentua.
Welcome back into the studio. That's the excerpts of the press conference held by the minority on they believing that they've been vindicated. Is that the position that we should be having now? Because really, I don't think it's about you being vindicated currently, considering where we are.
Yeah, Anne, yes, the vindication is there, but I think that where we've got into, we need to rather come out with solutions, because we are all in it. Now, looking at the impact of the debt restructuring, especially on individual bondholders as we speak, it is going to even affect businesses. And
Yeah.
if you look at wealth and income of individuals, it's going to affect it. Okay, disposable, income is going to be affected. You look at banks. Banks are likely to have serious cash problems. Okay, they are likely to have liquidity issues, because banks have also invested in GOG securities. So if banks have invested in bonds and such bonds are being affected, of course, it means that such banks will also suffer. And banks also derive a chunk of their revenue from interest that they earn when they give out loans and interest that they earn on investment and all that. So if government is unable to meet such obligations in terms of paying back what banks have invested, then it's going to affect their operations. Okay? Now, cost of borrowing and will be affected. As we speak, how much are we paying for what do you call it? Interest on loan? Huge, because the policy rate is 29%. So if that is given to banks, they need to add some to it before they give out loans, and it is going to be very expensive for businesses to
run on expensive
loans. Go for loans and that kind of thing. And if you are not very careful, my fear is that businesses will begin to contract. Expansion will be a problem. Production will begin to fall, because if you are not having enough money as an individual or as a business person to expand, it can even affect employment.
Let me go to Setekwe. Setekwe, please, are you there?
Yeah, and I must apologize to your viewers. I've still not resolved the video.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's okay. But
Yes.
right. So I said I was actually going to ask you about the expenditure trimming, and I stated that the president already gave us measures of trimming expenditure, cutting down on salary by 30%, directing MMDEs to be holding meetings in their offices and not hotels, all those little things, driving less consumption vehicles and not using V8 within the territories that was prescribed in the measures, and things of that nature. Were they a drop in the ocean, or something that we can, generate some revenue from?
Well, you would note that the government did not give, details in terms of how much was going to be saved. Our computation at the point in time suggested that, no more than, 1 to 4%, of the total expenditure was going to be saved by those measures. And that is because they are not the big ones. The size of government is obviously one, which we have been discussing. You can assume that much of that is in salaries and expenditure. But we don't have, really big ones. Let me just cite two in the interest of, time. The free SHS. I think that some of us have been on record that an unfettered free SHS program is unlikely, to be fully financed for a sustainable period from the budget. And that is true, because if you recall, and I think it's time to, when you talk about vindication, nobody is gloating about vindication, but you recall some of the topics that were covered on your show, because I've appeared on these shows, this and other shows.
Right.
First of all, recall that we had attempted to clear the Heritage Fund, which is part of the reserves that is being depleted today, to pay for free SHS. There was a debate as to whether that was also human capital, and the resistance that came before it was paid. You will also recall that PIAC and others had raised concerns about the unproportionate allocation or disproportionate allocation of, the ABFA funds, which goes to the budget, to education. You would recall that we started borrowing heavily. If you go to the papers presented to Parliament, I recall very well, I believe the 2017 bond, we allocated over 2.2 billion Ghana cedis of that bond to just free SHS, recurrent expenditure, not capital. So the signs have been there that, borrowing to finance, a recurrent expenditure was not a way forward. Even if you borrow to finance capital expenditure, which does not pay for itself, you must see growth in the economy so that it can be paid. So yes, the situation is respect to where we are. So that would have to be tackled. You would also have to take a program like 1D, 1F. Yes, we all know that it is mainly private sector, which is, which often produce some of these factories. But the injury, if we may put it that way, is in the concessions that are granted, which deplete, in addition to concessions that are already in our tax laws, additional ones that has made revenue stagnant. You know that GRA revenue coming to the budget has been stagnant, and your deficit, which is financed by the debt we are talking about, is the difference between revenue and expenditure. So you see where the difficulty lies. We may not be able to go back on those. But I think the realism now is that those of us who pay fees, continue to pay fees for maybe nieces and nephews, even if our children have completed school, and also would bear, and even, the low-income people who are supposed to be helped by the program. You all agree with me that, particularly for those in boarding houses, parents have to supplement. So it tells you that the program is not sustainable if parents have to start sustaining. There are the huge arrears which head teachers and masters have been complaining about, and the assurance which has been debated, by the same, sector as to, whether food was available for the school term that was, reopening. And in some cases, 10%, in some cases, nil, and the promise. So we know that is the context in which, a lot of people, including myself, have said that we should look at the big expenditure items. It's not new, as I keep saying, in order that it doesn't look like one is pontificating. You will remember that going to 2016, going to the elections in 2016, when crude oil prices fell, the government at the time, the NDC government, decided to cut down on the number of e-schools, which was very, very competitive option, in the debate. Decided to cut down the e-schools, from the 150 or so that were in progress, let alone the 200 e-schools, down below 100, with a promise that should we win the elections and come into 2017, then we would, with fortunes like Sankofa, Tenfield coming on stream and others, we would revisit, and build the e-school. So this has been done. I mean, past governments have looked at expenditure critically. But if the goal is to carry forward, these expenditure items, they are big, they are huge. And let me say that if you look at the medium-term budget that was presented, in fact, some of the expenditure items, I think, are debatable, but maybe we can discuss that, at another point in time. Having said that, let me also say that there are a few positive things that have happened. We talk about, the pensions. In fact, in that statement, there was a line that suggested, that the TUC was open to further discussions with government, which if that was the consensus that was reached, would be, would be positive in terms of the consultation that a lot of people have been talking about, including, eminent persons, even sympathetic to the government, like Mr. Kwame Pianim and the rest. So that is one. The second one is that, in fact, in the announcements before, on the structure of the bonds, there was the new bonds. There was an indication that the number would be increased by 8 from 4 to 12. In fact, what that actually did was to annualize, the bond redemption. I mean, if you look at it carefully, what it meant was that instead of waiting for 3-4 year gaps before some of the bonds would be redeemed, if you look at the dates that went with the 8, they were like filling gaps, which meant that government has the intention of redeeming, the bonds on an annual basis. Should things, let's qualify, should things, go well, which will mean should we comply, rigidly with the IMF program and reduce, the deficit. I think those were also hopeful things which, which are things that can be brought to the table in the course of the discussion as the minority is discussing. Let me also say, in terms of what we are discussing, that you see, it's not individuals only, and it's not all businesses that will suffer. The government itself will suffer. Because remember, as we speak, the budget is a deficit budget, and it has to be financed. And even though, and then another technical point was that arrears are now to be amortized as part of the debt restructuring, which means that at a minimum, the government must continue paying interest. Now, this interest by government, which was said already, is from savings, right? And if it's from savings, then it means that if savings are depleted because of another very dangerous thing that could happen, which is confidence in the banking sector, then it means government itself would continue, with the shortfalls that it experiences when it goes to the market to borrow. We've known about those shortfalls, and it will mean that we may get to a point when, honestly, Bank of Ghana would not have, much reserves, which is thought to be around 1%, or just print paper. And we know that we've gone through that before in the 1970s, paper money, just printing, nobody wants that. We don't want to go back 40 years. We've come a long way. So these are some of the injuries which, the current trend, could result in. Let me mention one other one. We've not been talking about Bank of Ghana. The banks are required to, and it alludes to the point that was made by my colleague. The banks are required to keep a certain, percentage of their, savings as part of the measures that Bank of Ghana uses, with the central bank. Is the central bank going to continue to insist on this? Because that's a protective, mechanism. And it's also used sometimes by increasing and decreasing it. We all know about the interest rate, but these deposits, by moving them up and down, Bank of Ghana is one of the instruments Bank of Ghana uses to control, the economy. So you see the extent to which savings itself is very key and important, to our monetary policy.
Right.
We seem to be very much aware of interest rates and what it does, because we all expect some interest rates on our treasury bills. So I think this is, and then finally, before I land or pause, in fact, as with the pension funds, there are institutions that are required, to invest a proportion of their savings in government bonds. And that is what is threatened, and that is what, is important. So if we are not careful, government bonds globally, until recently, are known to be safe, very safe havens, where you can invest. And it is said, of course, in association with advanced countries, and even with ourselves for a long time, that government will never fail to pay its debt. That is what we are beginning to see now.
Right. Setekwe, thank you so much for your time. We'll engage you again, because this is, I'm sure it's going to be overlapping each other during the weekend. So we'll get back to you again. But he ended by saying that, government instruments all over the world is not the safest. But we know otherwise, that, investing in government is better.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
There is always an element of risk, even if you are investing in government security.
Sure. I mean,
Yes,
we agree.
you are talking about the real value, nominal value of whatever investment you have made. Now, if this debt restructuring is to go on, definitely people are going to lose in terms of their interest, the nominal value will go down. So it is not completely true for us to assume that all GOG bonds or GOG securities are risk-free. There is still an inherent risk in there, which we don't normally
but
calculate.
we're not actually saying that they're risk-free.
Yeah.
We're saying that investing in government securities are less risk.
Yes, it's the safest, yes.
Or the safest compared to
exactly so.
Other private whatever investment.
Yes, but what you are saying now will definitely put fear in people. The confidence that people will have in investing in government securities will definitely go down. So, of course, let's pray that...
Unfortunately, the confidence which I've been talking about since morning has been the communication trend.
Yeah.
that's coming from government, that we're not going to IMF and we end up going to IMF. Then it comes to the fact that there's not going to be haircut. Because of IMF, we had to, give IMF better books.
Yeah.
So we are saying that's restructuring. Then president says no haircuts. It ends up there's haircuts. No individual bonds. It ends up there is individual bonds. So the communication within the already troubled economy.
Yes, you see, if you keep people in suspense, they're in heightened suspicion. Okay, definitely, if government is not ready to come out and tell Ghanaians that this is what we intend doing and we are going by it, but it is not a back and forth, and that is why this whole debt restructuring is delaying, because people don't have confidence in what government is doing. They'll be told today they are not part of the debt restructuring. Tomorrow it will change. So what next? And people are even envisaging that with the way things are going on, if government doesn't succeed in this bond restructuring, T-bills are likely to be affected. That is what people are saying. And of course,
because now government is just launching on every available
exactly
funds.
You see, so instead of we saying something and backtracking, we should be resolute in our conviction. This is what we want to do. Convince the people. And they also buy into it. And I'm happy the minority also raised this issue of cutting down government expenditure. And from 137 billion to 205 billion, when you are faced with such crisis and you intend tackling it, rather creating more deficit
For yourself.
For yourself. So you are telling the people we want to do this, but in real situation, you are not exhibiting good faith when it comes to their expenditure.
Right. So it's a hot one. We this is what time will allow us, but we will definitely get back to it and then see how the discussion and the conversations with the stakeholders, and you say the main stakeholders. Yes, how the conversation with the main stakeholders are going. Daniel Osabute is economist and a lecturer at the Ghana Accra Technical University. Setekwe, we spoke with him earlier on. He's also former finance minister. We're expecting Manasseh Atabuahen, who speaks for government on the economy. He couldn't join us, so I'm sure another time he may. But that's all time will allow us. I am Ania from Pofo. Thanks for watching. This is Good Afternoon, Ghana.